Good day everyone, this is Muhammad Nasim Firdaus and I am here to narrate this PowerPoint presentation which is on communicative language teaching. Today we will be focusing on is CLT, the ultimate language teaching approach. Can we consider communicative language teaching as the ultimate one to teach English language or not? Though our prime focus is to explore the teaching pedagogy, teaching methodology, along with the materials which we will use as a teacher to teach our students the English language. So this particular presentation will give you more idea about this approach which is communicative language teaching, and in this PowerPoint we will have an overview of this particular approach, and then we will try to identify whether it is possible that in Bangladesh we can use this particular approach for teaching English language or not, and we will have other issues as well. The information in this particular PowerPoint presentation were gathered from Richardson Rogers, Larson Freeman, and different other sources, and this PowerPoint is presented by me. So let's start. The origins of communicative language teaching. So how come communicative language teaching has come to this teaching learning environment? It happened in 1960s, and according to Howard, it was clear that the situational approach, another approach, had run its course, and there was no future in continuing to pursue the chimera of predicting language on the basis of situational events. What was required was a closer study of the language itself and a return to the traditional concept that utterances carried meaning in themselves and expressed the meaning and intentions of the speakers and writers who created them. So it was back in 1960s when situational approach was clear, and it has passed its time, and there was no future on it. So that's why it was looked of a more close study. Those studies find that the meaning should be the prime one, and the intention as well. How the speakers and the writers who create the language, how will they do it? That will be the prime concept. So that's why CLT was needed to implement. And according to Himes, being able to communicate required more than linguistic competence. It required communicative competence. In order to have the ability to have the knowledge of the particular language. For example, if we want to learn English language, so we'll be looking at the linguistic feature of English language, and we'll try to gather the communicative competence. Communicative competence refers the ability to communicate accurately, appropriately, and flexibly. And based on that, the learners will know when and how to say what to whom. They will understand the context, they will understand the relationship, they will understand and the person whom they are talking, and then they will produce the language, which will help to develop the communication between the language users or among the language users. And though this observation contributed to a shift in the field in the late 1970s and early 1980s from a linguistic structure-centered approach to a communicative approach. So though this particular CLT approach came to its peak after 90s, but it was developing after 1970s and the early 90s as based on a linguistic structure-centered approach, and which was referred as communicative approach. So what are the key specifications? So what are the features of CLT? So here are some major features of CLT, and definitely you can find the others one and in Richards and Rose as well. So, but I in this particular slide, I focus the major one. First one is the contextualization. Contextualization is a basic premise because it is based on the meaning. So if you don't have context, if you don't understand the context, then you will not produce a meaning, and that's how you will not be able to communicate. So that's why contextualization is the primary one in CLT. And any learner will learn a language in order to communicate. So they will learn the language in order to communicate in that particular language. And the device, any device can be help for the learners. And those devices which will help the learners will be accepted. And those devices will be set based on age, interest, and there could be other variables. Communicative competence. We say that communicative competence, that means the ability to use the language. The language user needs to produce adequate, that means grammatically correct sentences, and then he will be able to produce language in a flexible way. And of course, he or she needs to use the language based on the context. So if the learner has the ability of grammatical competence and social-linguistic competence and then strategical competence, then the person will have communicatively competent in that particular language or in the target language. So that is the prime focus in here. And the learners will learn the language based on trial and error. So they will produce the language, then they will find the problem there, and they will learn from their errors. And the role of the teachers will be to help the learners in any way that motivates. So the teacher will motivating the learners, as the learners can work with the language. They will not learn about the language, rather they will work with the language. And students are expected to interact with other people that could be other students, that could be other native language users, even that could be other foreign language users, that could be second language users. So their role is to interact with other persons, either in the flesh, or that means as individual, or they could do it in pair, or they also do it in group, or of course in written text. So how CLT treats language? So is there any special treatment from CLT? So actually these are based on the theory of language, how CLT treats or CLT thinks about the language. CLT thinks, communicative language teaching thinks that the language is a system for the expression of meaning. So any language user who will produce the language, he or she will produce the language in order to express the meaning of what he or she intends to mean. So that's why the primary function of a language is to allow interaction and communication, interact to different people, negotiate the meaning. That's the base function of a language. That's what CLT believes. And the structure of language reflects its functional and communicative uses. It doesn't only based on the structure as we found in audiolingual method or grammar translation method. So rather, it will be based on the functional, how language functions and how one language user can communicate. So those will be the prime things. The primary units of language are not merely its grammatical and structural features, but categories of functional communicative meaning. So in sum, if we want to precise this whole thing, the theory of language, CLT treats language as a functional and communication device. So CLT believes that a language is a functional way, a language is a communicative device by which the language users can use to communicate and to have function and to produce different meaning. So how a language learner will learn a language, how to learn a language, how to learn English language. So there are lots of the features, lots of the principles in there, though those principles were not majorly highlighted, but still we can find three major principles of language learning. Communication principle, and based on this principle, a learner can learn a language based on the activities that involve real communication which promote learning. So the learners, or the language learners I should say, they will be involved in different activities which will be focused on real communication. For example, in our daily life, we have different communication. And let me give you one concrete example. I wanted to go someplace, but I do not have proper idea about the address. So I stopped to a stranger and I asked him for the location. And those particular conversation is considered as real communication. And even if you want to buy something and if you want to have the review as well in a written format, and for doing that, if you communicate with the other person, which will consider as real communication as well, and those real communication will promote learning. Another principle is the task one. Activities in which language is used for carrying out meaningful tasks promote learning. So the activities which we will produce for engaging the learners, if they have meaningful tasks, so based on those activities, if we have meaningful tasks, those tasks will promote learning as well. Meaningfulness of principle, another principle of language learning, refers that language that is meaningful to the learner supports the learning process. If the learner understand or have the meaning of what he or she wants to mean in that particular language, in the target language, then those meaningful interactions, those meaningful language uses will help the learners to learn the process. Comparing to the other methods or approaches, CLT based on meaning and communication and contextualization, and the principle is mainly from the learner's perspective, from the language user's perspective. So it is based on communication principle, trust principle, and meaningfulness principle. That means a learner can learn a language by doing that. So we can easily identify a difference. The difference is that in other methods and other approaches, they talk about on learning, but here CLT talks about specifically language learning, how to learn the language. So the objective, the P4 in 1981, and the objectives are here, and it was cited in Richards and Rogers. And the first one is an integrative and content level. That means language as a means of expression. The language users will use the language in order to express his or her feelings. Then we have a linguistic and instrumental level. That means language is a semiotic system. That means it is a symbolic system, and an object of learning. So we will have the language in order to learn the language. And then an effective level of interpersonal relationships and conduct. That means language as a means of expression, values and judgments about oneself and others. So we'll be developing interpersonal relationship through a language. So we'll be having our expressions, we'll be having meaning in order to build the communication, establish the relationship, and that's how the language learning will happen. And then a level of individual learning needs. That means remedial learning based on error analysis. That means if I use the language, then definitely I will have some errors, and based on those errors I will analyze those errors, and I will try to solve those problems, and I will be learning the language in a better way. And number 5, the last one referred by before, is a general education level of extra linguistic goals. That means language learning with this school curriculum. So definitely there will some extra linguistic goals. So not only having the structures, not only having particular dialogues, rather it will be talking about using the language outside the classroom in a real life situation. And this particular approach will help the learners to utilize the language outside the classroom in real life. So what will be the teaching and learning activities? How, which activities will be followed in CLT? As CLT is based on the communication and interaction, and those interaction and communication are based on real life activities. So literally the range is unlimited. So the way you will be able to produce activities, learning activities or teaching activities, which they will be unlimited. But of course they will be focused. The focus will be that they will have communicative objectives. The activities the teacher will implement in the classroom, they will be based on communicative objectives. The learners must have to be able to communicate in the classroom, and they will have to engage in order to communicate. And of course they require the use of such communicative approaches as information sharing, negotiation of meaning and interaction. So in order to share the information, in order to negotiate the meaning, and in order to interact, they will use the activities. So those activities will be focusing on the communication. And classroom activities are often designed to focus on completing tasks. So if we talk about grammar translation method, it is based on the structure. The learners will be able to learn about the language, and that means they will learn the structures, they will be learn the grammatical items, and that's how they will learn the language. But here they will be a completing task. They will be doing different tasks through different activities, and that's how they will be involved themselves as in gathering information, in sharing information, and in negotiating meaning. So the teachers, what will they do? The teachers' roles. Generally speaking, the teachers will have a lot of things to do, though it seems that the teacher will do nothing in communicative language teaching. But if we consider, if a teacher wants to involve in CLT, he or she has as ample of roles. He or she will have to act as facilitator, monitor, independent participator, organizer of resources. He will be act as a resource by himself or herself. He will be a guide, he will be a researcher, he will be a needs analyst, he will be a counselor, and he will be a group process manager. Okay, so lots of roles he or she has to play in a CLT based class. So first one is the facilitator. As it is this particular CLT approach is mainly student centered. So the teacher will not be an authoritative one, so that the teacher will be playing as the role of facilitator. He or she will be facilitating the classroom by guiding the learners, and he or she will be monitoring. She will be monitoring the students, the learners, as about everything, whether how far they are doing, their use of language, their communication. All of the things will be monitoring by the teacher, and the teacher will be participator of, or the teacher will be an independent participator. Like, he or she will be participating in the classroom, not as a teacher, maybe as a participator, maybe in the group, in the task he will be participating. And then he will be organizing the resources. There will be lots of resources which is very much needful for the learners, and those resources will be organized by the learners. Interestingly, the teacher will be act as resource by himself or herself. The learners will have lots of information from the teacher himself or herself. He or she will guide the learners what to do, what are the activities need to follow, what are the tasks need to follow, how the activities and tasks will be completed. All of the things will be guided by the teacher. The teacher will be act as a researcher. He will research in the classroom. He will be identifying the learners what are their problems, and he will be focusing and based on the series of their errors, and then categorize them, and then he or she will execute new way to promote learning. He or she will be act as a needs analyst. The teacher needs to identify what his or her learners want. What is their goal? Based on their goal, analyzing the goals of the learners, the teacher need to input, the teacher need to implement the task and activities. The teacher needs to introduce the task and activities based on different variables. That could be age, that could be a social group, that could be based on different genre of the learners, whether what is the objective of the learners, whether they want to go outside, and that's why they need the learners, or what. And he will be act as counselor. He will counsel. So he will not be a authoritative one. He will be counseling the students. He will be guiding the students. Though guiding and counseling are almost same, but counselor refers a deeper thought. And then he or she will be acting as group process manager. Group process manager means, as there will be groups, there will be peers in the classroom, and he will be managing those groups. He will be handling those peers and groups, and he will be observing whether they are working or not, how far they are doing these things. And the learner's role, what will be the learner doing in this classroom? First one, the learner will be acting as a negotiator. Negotiator means he will be negotiator between the self, by himself, the learning process, and the object of learning. According to Breen and Candlin, learners will be act as a negotiator. He will negotiate the meaning among the self-learning process and the object of learning. What is the objective of this learning? What are the things which are going to be learned in the classroom? And the learner will be a participator. He will be participating in all the classroom activities. So this is very important for the learners. If the teacher fails to make sure the participation of the learners, then it will be very hard for the teacher to teach following CLT approach. So as a participator, the learners will have classroom activities based on cooperative rather than the individualistic approach of learning. As this particular CLT approach thinks that It is based on communication. The learners will learn the language in order to communicate with the other language users. So there will be nothing on individual learning. Rather, it will be a cooperative one. And the enterpriser, he or she will be a self-motivator. Yes, he will be responsible by himself or herself, and he will learn the language with his or her own initiative. If he or she doesn't have this kind of enthusiasm, if he or she doesn't have those kind of interests, and those learners might face problem to learn a language through this particular approach. So what kind of materials should you use, and what will be the role of those materials? The primary role of these materials is to influence the quality of classroom interaction. The materials will establish classroom interaction in the classroom as the learners can interact. So they will use the language. To promote communicative language will be the base role of the material. Those materials they have to have establishing communication. So what are the types? The types are text-based, task-based, and realia. Text-based means there will be lots of text in there, and based on those texts, the text will be in the target language, though the teacher, the CLT counselor or facilitator, he or she can use native language according to his or her needs, but the literature, the text, which will be based on communication and interaction. So those texts can be used as a material, and the different tasks can be initiated, like a simulation, group work, pair work. Through this one, they can introduce a task, and by completing those tasks, the materials which will have lots of the tasks can help the learners initiate learning and interaction. And the realia refers the real life object. Real life object, that means let me give an example. For example, if you want to buy a SIM card for your mobile, for your cell phone, then you must have to register from the part of the mobile operator, network operator. And in order to do that, you need to fill a form. Or even if you want to open a bank account, you need to fill a form. And those form, if that particular form is in the target language, for example, for Bangladeshi language, Bangladeshi language users who wants to learn English language, they will find that the production of English language in those account opening forms, in those SIM registration forms, and some of them are in English. And if they have those kind of tasks, if they have those kinds of elements in there in order to learn this language, those particular objects will be considering as realia. So what will be the procedure? How a teacher will process as a CLT classroom? So though I strongly recommend you to follow Larson Freeman one, the techniques book, because in that book a classroom experience is there. If you read this classroom experience, you will be able to visualize as of how a CLT approach based classroom takes place in a real life scenario. So let's have the procedure in a theoretical base. First one, the presentation. So there we'll have presentation on the learning, and based on presentation, these things will happen. And after the presentation, there will have oral practice. as the learner or the language users will have oral practice, and there will be question answer session. There will be lots of question answer session based on the dialogues, or they can have those things. I mean, the learners will be able to will be producing questions and answers in there, and then study on the basic communicative expressions. Then after this question and answer session, the learners will have study on the communicative expressions. They will be developing or producing different communicative expressions. And then learner discovery of generalization of rules underlying the functional expression of structure. And then they will be discovered the generalization. They will be, though the language items will not be explicit, they will be learned implicitly. They will be generalizing the rules, and then they will be understanding how the expression of this language is takes place. And then oral recognition, that means interpretative activities. Interpretative activities refers that they will be able to understand the sounds. They will be able to understand the direction and the structure. For example, the direction. If the teacher wants, for example, the teacher asks some students to come to the center of a classroom, and then he or she directs the learners to go one side to another side. The learners will have the recognition of those directions, and then that's how they will be developing the sounds. And after developing the sounds, they will be develop oral production. They will be able to speak and use the language as well. And the evaluation of course based on the trial and error. So they will be having the learner the trial and the error, and that's how they will be learning. So the learners will have the problems, they will make errors, and after evaluation they will be able to solve these problems, and then they will correct themselves, and that's how they will learn. So that's the procedure. You will have a detailed procedure in your textbook 1, which is which is the book by Richardson Rogers. And in the Richardson Rogers, you will find this particular procedure of model, which is developed by Finisher and Brumfitt in 1983. So, is it the ultimate one? Is communicative language teaching the ultimate language teaching approach? Yes, it is a diverse set of principles, and there is a communicative view, and it is used to support a wide variety of classroom procedures, but it focuses on fluency, not accuracy. So there is a possibility that there are lots of problems in the structure of a language. And as it does not focus on error reduction, so it might lead incoherent, grammatically incorrect sentences. So there are less based on the error correction because mainly the teacher will be focusing on the communication. He or she will be focusing on the fluency rather than accuracy. So it is possible that incoherent, grammatically incorrect sentences produced by the learners, maybe a new type of language can be occurred, maybe an interlanguage. Teachers have to face many obstacles because lots of responsibilities from the part of a teacher. And with regard to students, CLT and the education system, they will be able to they will be facing lots of obstacles in there. And we cannot forget the socio-cultural realities. So the way it is produced, so it might not be applicable in different countries where the adaptation of CLT approach might be a problem because of the socio-cultural realities. What could be the social cultural realities? I am having question in there, so you can use your comment section and forum to answer this one. What will be the social cultural realities in your country following CLT as a teaching approach? So in Bangladesh, what could be the issues? Rahman and Karim in 2015, they identified some of the issues. The teacher in this country, in Bangladesh, is a central figure, and they must be honored, and the students must passively listen to the teacher. So this is exactly the opposite of CLT. And the relationship between the teachers and students, it is formal in our country, but the CLT wants the teacher to communicate, to guide, to assimilate with the learners. But in Bangladesh, the teacher is assumed to be a superior, omniscient figure. And students are not encouraged to interrupt. When the teacher speaks, the learners, that means the students, will be silent. They will be listening only. So there are less option for the learners to interrupt. And the methodology is derived from the Western societies, and that's what I was referring in the previous slide, socio-cultural. So, and philosophical paradigms, which is not accepted or not popular in our country. So, social societies are formed from the West. This particular approach was based on the Western societies, which might fail in this particular context. And of course, we cannot overlook the class size. As in Bangladesh, we will have lots of students in a classroom, and those students, it will be very tough for the teacher to produce interaction in a large class size. And of course, the teacher training is needed as well, as the teacher will have lots of the roles. He or she needs to have the resource by himself or herself, and the resource organized as well. So lots of teacher training needs in order to facilitate CLT in a language classroom. So this will be a uniform topic. So I want all of you involvement in this particular topic-based forum. If you are a teacher of English language and you want to implement CLT, what would you do? What are the materials you would try to use for your learners? So please write there. And we are at the end, but we need to identify the differences between CLT and ALM. I believe you have the features of ALM. You have learned and understood the features of ALM, and in this particular slide you have gathered knowledge on CLT. So now we can identify the differences between CLT and ALM. So go through those features and identify the differences, and this will also help you to identify the differences between a method, which is ALM, and an approach as well. So this is a method, yes, an audiolingual method, and CLT is approach. So if you look closely, then you will identify the differences. So we already have this one. If you do not understand, if you did not visit those classes, please do visit those classes. Visit the classes on ALM, and visit, of course, methods, approach, and technique, those classes, and then you will be able to identify the differences in there. So you will be able to give more differences based on this one. Okay, and here the references I use: Richards and Rogers, and that's your textbook 1, and Larson Freeman, that's your textbook 2. I strongly recommend you to go through this book to have this experience. And I had different research articles and different internet sources to produce this narration, this PowerPoint presentation. So I believe you have some questions, and please do them in the forum. Okay, and do not create unnecessary topic. Just visit different topics created by others and put your questions in there. And of course, you can join in there in the discussion, and you can answer and share your opinions as well. So thank you very much for being there. I know it is hard to stay in front of your computer for long 39-40 minutes in there, but still you were there, still you listened everything. I hope this particular slides will have lots of information on these things. So I would like to thank you from core of my heart. So please do bye. Thank you very much.